Hello and welcome to Talking Europe. As the EU begins negotiations at the crucial COP27 summit in Egypt, we welcome Chiara Martinelli, the director of Climate Action Network Europe. It describes itself as Europe's leading NGO coalition fighting dangerous climate change. CAN Europe has more than 180 member organizations in 38 countries, and it represents over 1,500 NGOs. Before joining CAN Europe, Chiara Martinelli spent 15 years working in the development cooperation sector. She joins me from Brussels. Chiara Martinelli, thank you so much for being my guest today. How would you assess Europe's climate ambition in these COP talks?
The science is telling us today that we already live in a planet that reached 1.2 degree of global warming. What that means, it means that we are very close, and the window is closing to the agreed ambition in Paris in 2015 by all governments that we wanted to limit global warming overall to 1.5 degree max.
Your organization has called for Europe to upgrade its commitments when it comes to emissions from 55% reduction by 2030 to at least 65%. Why that 10% difference that you're calling for?
This 10% difference is critical because it will allow Europe to keep on track on the 1.5 and on carbon neutrality by 2040 without any delay. Because 65% the size of emission reductions by 2030 is Europe's fair share globally on the steps that are needed to reach this carbon neutrality globally and to reach the 1.5 globally as a whole planet, as a whole international community. So it's critical to overshoot the 55% that Europe committed a couple of years ago, and we welcome the progress that has been done in that regard. And we do call the EU in Sharm-el-Sheikh to publicly commit to overshoot that target of 55%, because that will give an important message to the rest of the negotiating parties that Europe is committed to keep on track on 1.5.
Let's talk about another aspect of COP27. There's more emphasis than I think it's fair to say than at previous COPs on climate finance and what activists would call climate justice for the global south, and particularly climate loss and damages, which is something that developed countries were resisting in Glasgow. Your organization is saying that climate finance should be given in the form of grants, not loans. I just wanted to put it to you that the idea that the problem with that surely is if we're talking about heavily indebted poor countries, these are countries which have some of the worst corruption problems. And so if developed countries are going to give grants, what are the guarantees that that money is actually going to go to those people who need it? This is the big problem, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is an important thing to say first. I mean, at the heart of climate finance for loss and damage and climate finance in general, as you said, there is the concept of climate justice. So what that means in practice when it comes to money is that the biggest emitters need to support financing poor countries' mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. So when we say that this climate finance needs to be delivered through grants, it means that it needs to go hand in hand with the plans on ensuring an energy transition, in those countries. So we cannot afford those countries to go through the same mistakes, actually, that developed countries went through and locking in fossil fuel economy or a fossil fuel system, but rather making sure that this climate finance support is enabling and speeding up the energy transition, and meaning a transition towards renewables energy for those countries.
Let's have a closer look together, Chiara Martinelli, if you will, that energy transition. We have a report actually from Ivory Coast, which looks at European investment in electricity infrastructure and renewable energy. This report by Sadia Manjo and Olivier Bizot. Let's have a look.
The Ivorian capital Yamoussoukro has the largest electricity dispatching centre in West Africa. From this 4-storey building, electricity is sent out through Ivory Coast and to neighbouring countries. In this room, machines distribute 2,500 megawatts. They come from dams and from thermal and hydraulic power. The project is mostly funded by the EU, which has helped Ivory Coast become a regional energy hub.
The European Investment Bank has funded 3 projects. 60 million euros to expand the electricity network in the Abidjan area, 16 million euros for components and energy efficiency, and 40 million for dispatching electricity.
Green investment was at the heart of the Common Financing Summit held in Abidjan in October of this year. It reaffirmed Europe's goals, promoting green projects on a continent that doesn't pollute much, but that is disproportionately hit by the effects of climate change.
For us, Europe and Africa are 2 continents that really go together. We have common concerns and problems. Climate change affects Africa, it affects Europe, it impacts the whole world, actually. So we have to work together to try to prevent climate change. This is why we are joining forces with African countries on renewable energy, on energy efficiency, and on various innovative projects. Because the African continent is already having to cope with climate change and to adapt accordingly.
Those new projects include these solar panels in Mozambique and several wind farms in Kenya. The EIB has invested 59 billion euros in 52 African countries.
So, Chiara Martinelli, we could see there that the European Investment Bank is making a lot of investment, including in renewable energy in West Africa. But I suppose you would say there's a darker side to this European involvement in African countries, which is expanding gas networks. And you have a campaign called Don't Gas Africa. So just give us a quick overview of that, if you could.
Yes, sure. It's a campaign actually led by African civil society. And it's a campaign that is really a clear call towards the European countries and the European Union to stop going to shop for gas in Africa and basically trying to repeat and perpetuate the colonization approach that we have been witnessing since years and centuries. So what we are asking the EU leaders is to stop shopping gas and stop making new gas deals and building new gas infrastructures in Africa, but rather continuing and increasing the investment on supporting the energy transition towards 100% renewables also in those countries, as we saw the example also in the video. And I think this is an important point to raise when it comes also to the consequences of the Russian war against Ukraine. In the context of Europe, we saw the increase of prices in energy bills. And I think this is actually an opportunity for Europe to showcase and to walk the talk that renewables are actually not only greenest, but are also cheaper in this moment in time. So I think this is the best moment we have to speed up such renewables rollout in Europe and in the investments we do in other continents.
If Europe is to lead by example, we have to look at how big the differences are actually within the EU when it comes to climate performance. And just to show our viewers a graphic, this is something that your network contributed to, Chiara Martinelli. This is the Climate Change Performance Index, which is an independent monitoring tool. And you can see there are some quite big differences. So in green, the better performing countries overall, not really surprising there in Scandinavia. What's really striking about this is that the difference between Sweden and Poland is actually the same as the difference between Sweden and Malaysia, if you were to look at the global map. So does all of this undermine Europe's position, including at the COP, this ability to lead by example?
I don't think it undermines. I mean, the graph shows the reality. Europe is a diverse continent, and there are diverse countries with different performances when it comes to climate action. But actually, I think the recent history, like the last years of the European Union, showed us that when the Europe acts as a bloc, something can help accelerating the transition, accelerating the climate actions across the continent. And we see it particularly in the last months with the negotiations of what's the so-called the Fit for 55 package. That's the package of climate and energy policies that aim to implement the European Green Deal. So I think that Europe has only to gain in negotiating as a one bloc.
Okay, we'll have to end it there. Thank you so much for your insights, Chiara Martinelli, Director of Climate Action Network Europe. That's all for part one of the show. In part two, Catherine Nicholson brings you a debate from Brussels about media freedom in Europe. That's coming up in a few minutes.